Hello, everyone. And first, I just want to say that my name is Krista Diguer, and I am excited to be a part of the Culture Symposium for a second time. And today I will be talking to you about helping professionals, perceptions, and experiences of commercial sexual exploitation of children in Belize. So first, we must ask ourselves, what is commercial sexual exploitation of children? The World Congress Against Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children defined CSEC as sexual abuse by the adult and remuneration in cash or kind to the child directly or to a third party, such as parents, guardians, or other people. In these cases of CSEC, the child is treated as a sexual object and a commercial object. The definition encompasses situations such as child sex tourism and other forms of sex where a child engages in sexual activities to have their essential needs met, such as food, clothing, education, or shelter. This also includes instances where the sexual exploitation of a child is not stopped or reported by parents or guardians because of the benefits acquired from the perpetrator. So because the child is receiving money that the parents or guardians need or other resources, the parents and guardians do not act to stop this abuse. So we must examine the situation of CSEC in Belize. The government of Belize passed the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children Prohibition Act in 2013. Including within this law were statutes to make sexual assault legislation independent of gender of the victim and criminalization of all forms of child sexual exploitation, which included child pornography. And with this law, it brought great promise and international recognition for reducing and eventually eliminating child sexual exploitation and trafficking. But 9 years after its passing, what do we know about its impact and the current prevalence of exploitation and trafficking in Belize? Internationally, Belize has been labeled as a significant source and transit and destination country for all categories of individuals subjected to sex trafficking and forced labor, such as men, women, and children. The UN Special Report of 2019 on trafficking persons detailed that family members often facilitate sex trafficking of women and girls in Belize. And it's often, again, because of those benefits acquired by this interaction. So within Belize, there are 3 primary forms of commercial sexual exploitation of children. These include child sex tourism, a child connecting with a pimp in an attempt to support themselves or their family, and children who are exploited by family members, again, for those essential needs such as food, shelter, and other items. In colloquial terms, 2 of these forms of CSEC were identified as hit me on the hip and the dollar wop. The hit me on the hip phenomenon is driven by organized crime within Belize. It includes the use of illegal sexual activity, the go-between, or what is labeled as the pimp, and the trafficking victim. The individual acting as the go-between approaches young girls, often targeted girls in school uniforms, to recruit and entice them to become sex workers. The go-between then finds the clients or the buyers of the sexual activity, which includes tourists, and sends a message to the victim of who and when to meet the buyer. So we have the next term entitled Dalawap, and this originates from children providing sexual favors in exchange for fried chicken or exchange for food, shelter, and other necessities. The term Dalawap comes from the popular fried chicken, which is sold by the shops for prices starting at $1. These are children who are unable to rely on their caregivers or family for support, and in turn, they turn to commercial sexual trade to provide for themselves. Families, often mothers, do not stop this prohibited sexual abuse in their household due to this income providing essential needs such as food and clothing. In Belize, the data indicates that most of the individuals involved in exploiting children are the children's family members. And research on child sex tourism conducted by Weber in 2018 examined tourist motives for traveling and their actions at their destination. Weber discovered an association between sex and travel, as well as risky sexual attitudes, particularly in the areas of the world that are advertised as having sun, sex, and sand. This creates particular issues within the Caribbean. Although independence has been achieved, the Caribbean states and their tourism industry is still significantly dependent on foreign investors. The research found that this leaves the Caribbean with inadequate control over the country's development and resources. The author reports that CSEC is a large part of the infrastructure of sex tourism within the Caribbean, finding both children, adults working together within streets, nightclubs, and brothels. There are also black market websites to sell sex tours, which incorporate damaging cultural stereotypes to entice the potential sex tourist desires for power and control. So within my study, like was introduced at the beginning, we're looking at the perceptions of professionals working in Belize on CSEC. And the participants in this project were 4 helping professionals working in different areas and sectors of Belize. The helping professionals included in this project were 2 social workers, a director of an NGO organization that specializes in legal services, and a high school teacher. The goal was to gather diverse perspectives from professionals working in different capacities and different areas of the country. And these professionals were hypothesized to have some knowledge of CSEC, whether personal knowledge or professional knowledge, or even both. Participants were recruited through established professional connections and by convenience sampling. The interviews were conducted through Zoom due to the COVID-19 restrictions at the time, and were from 45 minutes to an hour long, depending on the participants' availability. There was an inductive thematic content analysis, and that was conducted to identify common themes within the interviews, common topics, ideas, patterns that come up repeatedly. The themes identified within the data for this project reflect the helping professionals' perceptions and experiences with CSEC, including poverty, education, culture, governmental and legal failures, and significant trauma. So here on the screen, you can see a quote from one of these participants, and this is personal experiences with CSEC. Like I said, a content analysis was conducted on 4 semi-structured interviews and revealed significant experiences with CSEC by all helping professionals. Examining the personal experiences of a high school teacher reflected in this quote on the screen, who was also at the time working as a school counselor and worked for 15 years within a rural district that is significantly affected by CSEC. She shared their response to the question, describe a significant memory or experience you have with witnessing CSEC or trafficking within your community. And again, the high school teacher's response is on your screen. This quote gives a clear example of how embedded CSEC and trafficking are within cultures where the mother was selling her daughters into sex trafficking. Of significance, this village is on the Guatemalan border, which is an active location for international trafficking and smuggling of all kinds. This also indicates a cultural value that contributes to CSEC and perpetuation of trafficking. The value of not involving oneself in someone else's affairs. This is a common theme within the interviews and spans many issues in Belize. This may be a value established due to the small size of Belize and consequences that are often faced due to sharing someone else's experiences. If a person was to report something that they witnessed, their neighbor or community member doing it would not be difficult for them to find out who reported them, and retaliation is a significant fear in this situation. Unexpectedly, this same participant describes having trauma responses associated with this memory when working with female students in the classroom. Trauma responses and experiences were replicated in all interviews and became a significant focal point of this analysis. Within this interview, the teacher describes bringing as much food as possible for her students to take home to try to eliminate the need to seek out CSEC for income related to food needs. Although the participant was not asked about trauma when this quote was analyzed, it was evident that a trauma response was expressed. And this interview data was analyzed for trauma responses using the Trauma Symptom Checklist 40. This participant expressed 7 specific trauma symptoms within their interview. The symptoms expressed by this participant included headaches, feelings of isolation, anxiety or panic attacks, stomach problems, feelings of guilt, tense feelings, and sadness. So again, here I provide a quote under the idea of professional experiences with CSEC. This person was a veteran social worker working in the west of the country for 20 years. He expressed distressing trauma symptoms classified as behavioral and emotional symptoms when outlining his professional experiences with cases involving CSEC. The interviewer, me, posed a question and I probed the social worker to describe his professional experiences with CSEC. He responded with the quote here that you can read on the screen. This case's psychological impact on this long-term social worker is significant, as the participant feels the need to continually look for this girl to avoid disturbing thoughts and images about what may have happened to her. This is not only an example of secondary trauma, but PTSD as well. According to Figley, 1999, trauma symptoms may cause significant disruption in functioning, which often leads to developing PTSD. This may be cause for concern as the participant is expressing behavioral actions associated with a trauma experience. This interview data, his interview was analyzed again for trauma symptoms, revealing 7 specific trauma symptoms found in his interview. These feelings were insomnia, flashbacks, feelings of isolation, anxiety or panic attacks, nightmares, feelings of guilt, and tense feelings. So, the participants were also asked to identify barriers to success of the CSEC 2013 law, in their opinion. And the third interview participant was a female director and founder of an NGO specializing in legal services. This NGO operates out of the north of Belize in Orange Walk District and has been operating for over 10 years. When asked about barriers in combating CSEC in Belize, this participant identified what she named as cultural level trauma. The idea of cultural level of trauma causing barriers in fighting CSEC and trafficking within Belize has not yet been explored within the literature. This participant explained that she sees trauma and its effect on every level of society that is supposed to be protecting the children of Belize. The participant explains that trauma affects the parents, police, social workers, and government officials. And because of this, children remain unprotected from CSEC. This quote on the screen is significant as it highlights unreported barrier to progress, trauma. The idea presented by this participant is that trauma is affecting all levels of society, which cause delays, issues, and further setbacks to combating CSEC in Belize. The idea of cultural trauma is significant. Future research is needed to uncover and substantiate this phenomena in Belize and its relation to CSEC. This participant's interview was also analyzed for trauma symptoms, and 4 trauma symptoms were found. The symptoms expressed included feelings of loneliness, trouble controlling anger, insomnia, guilt, and tense feelings. While this participant reported fewer emotional symptoms of trauma when compared to other participants, she described in greater detail how she sees trauma manifest culturally, create a barrier for CSEC. The cultural and societal level of trauma was also highlighted within the interview of the male social worker who has been working in one of the most poverty-stricken areas of Southside in Belize. This social worker expressed experiencing emotional symptoms of secondary trauma. These included feelings of overwhelm, hopelessness, feeling numb, and defeated. The participant expresses feelings of hopelessness after being asked about the factors that contribute to CSEC. So, what is cultural trauma? Cultural trauma occurs when members of a collectivity feel they have been subjected to a horrendous event that leaves marks upon their group consciousness, marking their memories forever and changing their future identity in fundamental ways. Participants indicated a societal or cultural level of trauma contributing to a lack of progress in fighting CSEC in Belize. Like individual trauma, cultural trauma can result from many different hardships and experiences resulting in severe symptoms. The only difference is the scope of its effect. Cultural trauma impacts an entire cultures rather than just the individual. Additional research indicates that historical or cultural trauma is significant and experienced by colonized nations. The authors of this research indicate that historical trauma can cause feelings of familial and social disruption, existential depression, chronic grief that manifests in culturally destructive behaviors, and re-experiencing colonial trauma through experiencing modern-day racism. So the preliminary results from the content analysis, although this research did not initially hypothesize trauma as being a barrier for progress in eliminating CSEC in Belize, the interviews revealed that this was a significant factor in the perceptions of the participants and not only affects the individuals that are in the helping professionals, but affects the entire system created to protect children. Passive comments within the interviews identified feelings of hopelessness, that unless systematic changes occur to address cultural trauma, the cycle of CSEC and trafficking will continue. The idea of cultural level trauma causing barriers in fighting CSEC and trafficking within Belize has not yet fully been explored by the literature. Through this research, trauma was highlighted as a possible significant factor as a barrier to progress in fighting CSEC. Future research should seek to establish a connection between cultural, individual, and secondary trauma and how it relates to CSEC, trafficking, and barriers for progress in protecting our children in Belize. Thank you for listening to my presentation today, and I look forward to the discussion and questions soon. Thank you.